Okay, let's dive right into Matthew chapter 9.
Sounds good.
So Jesus has just crossed the sea. He's back in Capernaum, which the text calls his own town.
Yeah.
And this chapter, it's less one single story and more like a series of really intense encounters, right? Back to back.
It really is. Things move fast. You see different facets of his ministry, his identity, almost one after another. It really packs a punch.
Totally. And it starts right away with this scene, some men carrying a paralytic on a mat.
Right, bringing their friend to Jesus.
But the detail that jumps out is that Jesus saw their faith, the friend's faith.
That's significant. It wasn't necessarily about the man on the mat initially. It was the faith of those who brought him.
Exactly. And Jesus doesn't just say, you're healed. He says, take heart, son. Your sins are forgiven.
Whoa. Okay, so right off the bat, that's a huge statement.
It is. And immediately, some teachers of the law who were there, they pick up on it. Internally, they're thinking, this fellow is blaspheming.
Because forgiving sins, in their whole understanding, that was something only God could do. So for a man to say it...
It's a claim to divine authority, pure and simple.
And they see it as blasphemy.
But Jesus, and this is another layer, he knows their thoughts. He senses that internal reaction.
Which is pretty revealing in itself.
Definitely. And he confronts them. He asks, why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts?
He calls them out on it directly.
Yeah, and then he poses this brilliant question, which is easier to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk.
It's a fascinating question. I mean, saying your sins are forgiven is verbally easier, right? There's no immediate visible proof needed.
Exactly. Anyone can say it. But healing someone, that requires demonstrable power.
So Jesus connects the two. He's basically saying, you doubt my authority to do the invisible thing, forgive sins. Okay, watch me do the visible thing, heal, to prove I have authority for both.
Right. He says he'll show them that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And he uses that specific title, Son of Man.
Which is loaded with meaning about his identity and mission.
And then he just turns to the paralytic and says, get up, take your mat, and go home.
And the man does. Just like that, he gets up and walks out.
Incredible. And the crowd's reaction? Awe. They praised God, the text says, who had given such authority to men.
Which is interesting, isn't it? They see the power, they attribute it to God, but maybe they're still processing who this man is wielding it. It raises that question for you listening. When you encounter something that seems to demonstrate extraordinary authority, how do you process where it comes from?
Good question. And straight from that intense moment, Jesus moves on. He sees a man named Matthew.
Ah, Matthew, the tax collector.
Yeah, sitting in his tax booth. And we need to remember the context here, right? Tax collectors were not popular.
Not at all. They worked for the Roman occupiers, often seen as traitors, corrupt, essentially lumped in with sinners and excluded from polite religious society.
Total outsiders. And Jesus just looks at him and says two words, follow me.
That's it. Simple, direct.
And Matthew, he just gets up, leaves the booth, leaves his whole life behind, basically, and follows him.
Instantly. It's a radical response to a radical call.
And then this leads to another controversy. Jesus is having dinner, and it's at Matthew's house.
Right, and look who's invited.
Yeah, the guest list.
Yeah.
Many tax collectors and sinners. They're all eating with Jesus and his disciples.
This wasn't just sharing a meal. It was a public act of association, of acceptance, hugely significant in that culture.
And of course, the Pharisees notice. They see this happening.
And they're probably appalled.
They go to Jesus' disciples, kind of indirectly challenging Jesus, and ask, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? It's dripping with disapproval.
It's less a question, more an accusation, really, questioning his purity, his judgment.
But Jesus overhears them. And his response is, again, perspective shifting. He says, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick.
Boom, he flips it. He's saying, my place is with those who are spiritually sick, those who know they need help.
Exactly. And then he quotes the Old Testament, Hosea, telling them, but go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
That's such a crucial line. He's pointing out that God values compassion, relationship, reaching out to people, mercy, more than just rigidly following religious rules and rituals, sacrifice, especially if those rules push people away.
It's a direct challenge to their priorities. And he makes his own mission explicit. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners.
So his choice of company wasn't an oversight. It was the point. It makes you think, doesn't it? Why was this association with sinners so radical, so offensive to the religious leaders? And what does that phrase, mercy, not sacrifice, mean for how you live out your own faith or values?
Yeah, really makes you reflect. And this tension between sort of the established ways and what Jesus is bringing continues right into the next encounter.
Right. John the Baptist's disciples come up to Jesus.
And they have a very practical question about religious observance. How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?
Fasting was a standard religious practice, a sign of piety, often associated with mourning or seeking God intensely. So they're wondering why Jesus's group isn't participating.
Jesus answers with this analogy. He asks, can the guests of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them?
He's comparing himself to the bridegroom. His presence, he's saying, is like a wedding celebration. It's a time for joy, not fasting or mourning.
Exactly. It's inappropriate to fast when the main event, the celebration, is happening. He does add, though, the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast.
Acknowledging a future time of sorrow, but emphasizing that now is different because he's here.
And then he gives two quick parables to hammer home this idea that something fundamentally new is happening. First, the patch on old clothes.
Right. Nobody sews a patch of new, unshrunk cloth onto an old garment. Why?
Because when it shrinks, it'll just pull away and make the tear even worse.
Yeah.
The old fabric can't handle the strain of the new.
Right. And the second one, new wine, old wineskins.
You don't pour new fermenting wine into old brittle wineskins.
Because the fermentation creates pressure and the old skins will burst. You lose the wine and the wineskins.
The only way is to put new wine into new, flexible wineskins. Then both are preserved.
So these aren't just, random farming tips. They're metaphors.
Clearly, he's saying his teaching, his presence, the whole movement, he's starting this new wine. It can't just be contained within the old structures and mindsets, the old wineskins of traditional Judaism as practiced by some.
It requires something new. A new way of thinking, a new heart, maybe even new structures to hold it. You can't just patch the new onto the old. It demands a fundamental change.
It really makes you consider tradition versus innovation, doesn't it? How do you integrate something genuinely new and life-giving? Do you try to force it into old patterns, or do you recognize when new wineskins are needed?
A constant challenge. And just as he's finishing saying these things, the chapter shifts gear again, demonstrating his authority in really dramatic ways.
Yeah, it's like bang, bang, bang. A synagogue ruler comes up, kneels down, desperate. He says, "My daughter has just died."
Imagine the grief, the finality in that statement.
But then he adds, "But come and put your hand on her, and she will live." Incredible faith, even in the face of death.
And Jesus, he just gets up and goes with him, no hesitation.
But on the way, there's an interruption.
Always something happening in the midst of something else.
Yeah, a woman who'd been suffering from bleeding for 12 years. Think about that, 12 years of physical suffering, but also social and religious isolation because of ritual impurity laws.
A desperate situation. And she comes up behind Jesus in the crowd.
And she thinks to herself, her internal thought is, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed.
It's this act of quiet, almost hidden faith, reaching out just to touch the fringe of his garment.
And she does. And Jesus immediately knows. He turns, sees her, and says, "Take heart, daughter. Notice the tenderness, daughter. Your faith has healed you."
Not the touch itself necessarily, but her faith activating that power. And the text says she was healed at that moment.
Instantly. So after that detour, Jesus continues to the ruler's house.
And when he gets there, it's a scene of, mourning. Flute players. A noisy crowd, professional mourners were common.
It's a confirmation that, yes, the girl is believed to be dead. And Jesus tells them, "Go away, the girl is not dead, but asleep."
And their reaction, they laughed at him.
Yes, scornful laughter. They know death. This sounds absurd.
But Jesus isn't deterred by their lack of faith or their ridicule.
Nope. He has the crowd put outside, goes into the room, takes the dead girl by the hand.
And she gets up. Just like that. Raised from the dead.
Astounding. And news of this miracle understandably spread everywhere throughout that region.
You can imagine death is overcome by a touch and a word.
And it doesn't stop. As Jesus is leaving, two blind men start following him.
Right, and they're calling out, shouting, "Actually, have mercy on us, Son of David."
That title again? Son of David. They're recognizing him as the Messiah, the promised king.
Their cry is one of both need, have mercy, and faith, recognizing who he is.
So when they follow him indoors, Jesus puts the focus back on their belief. He asks them point blank, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?"
He wants their explicit confession of faith.
And they reply, simply but powerfully, "Yes, Lord."
That's all it took.
That's it. Jesus touches their eyes and says, "According to your faith, will it be done to you?"
And instantly their sight was restored. Again, that direct link. Faith, action, healing.
Now, interestingly, after this, Jesus warns them sternly. See that no one knows about this.
Which seems counterintuitive, maybe, but perhaps he's managing the crowds, the type of attention he's attracting.
Could be. But these guys, having received their sight, they can't contain it. They go out and spread the news all over.
You can hardly blame them, really.
I know. And right on the heels of that, as they're leaving, people bring another person to Jesus.
This time, a man who was demon-possessed and couldn't speak, mute because of the demon's influence.
And Jesus drives out the demon.
And the result, and the men who couldn't talk start speaking.
Another clear, undeniable demonstration of power over forces that silence and oppress people.
And the crowd's reaction this time. Amazement. They're saying nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel. They recognize how unprecedented this is.
But then you get the contrast again. The Pharisees.
Ah, yes, the counter-narrative.
They see the same miracle, the same undeniable power, but their explanation. It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons.
They can't deny the power exists, so they attribute it to the ultimate evil source. It's a stark contrast to the awe of the crowds.
It really highlights that recurring theme of faith, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In almost all these healings, faith plays a crucial role. The friends, the women's, the rulers, the blind men's. And then you see these wildly different reactions to Jesus' power. Faith, awe, praise, but also laughter and outright accusation. It makes you wonder, looking at the same event, what leads you to interpret it one way versus another?
That's the core question, isn't it? Perception and interpretation.
So after that whirlwind of specific miracles, the chapter kind of zooms out. It gives us a summary statement.
Right, it says Jesus went through all the towns and villages. He wasn't just stationary.
And what was he doing? Teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. It's this comprehensive ministry.
And crucially, the text tells us why he was doing it, his motivation.
Yes. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them.
That deep, gut-level feeling of empathy and concern.
Why? Because as he saw them, they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd.
That's a powerful image. Scattered, vulnerable, leaderless, maybe aimless. He sees their need, their suffering.
And this compassion, this seeing their condition, leads directly to an observation he makes to his disciples.
He tells them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few.
He sees the immense need, the potential for people to respond to God's kingdom, a vast harvest ready to be gathered, but there aren't enough people doing the work of gathering.
The need outweighs the resources, or at least the available workers.
So what's the solution he proposes?
He tells them, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field.
Prayer. Action rooted in prayer, prompted by compassion. His heart breaks for the crowd, which leads him to identify the need for more workers, which leads him to instruct his disciples to pray for those workers. It connects the compassion directly to the mission.
That connection is vital. Compassion isn't just a feeling, it fuels the mission. It drives the call for more people to get involved.
So looking back at Matthew 9 as a whole, wow, it covers so much ground.
It really does, from forgiving sins and healing paralysis to calling an outcast like Matthew, to eating with sinners, explaining why his new way requires new approaches, raising the dead, giving sight to the blind, restoring speech, casting out demons.
Yeah, the authority is just undeniable. Authority over sin, sickness, social barriers, nature, death itself, and spiritual darkness.
And those schemes just keep coming through. That authority, the radical inclusion, the clash between the new and the old, the absolute necessity of faith, the driving force of compassion, and ultimately the call to mission to get involved in the harvest.
It's incredibly rich. And maybe a final thought for you to chew on, based just on this chapter. Think about those wildly different reactions to Jesus. Awe, praise, faith, laughter, amazement, and that chilling accusation that his power came from demons. All in response to the same person, the same actions. What does that stark difference in perception tell you about how hard it can be to truly grasp or accept something profoundly new and challenging when it confronts your own reality or expectations?